Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Code with Lorenzo. Today I'm going to be teaching you every single thing you need to know about CSS, from margin to padding to font weight to font size to every single thing you need to know about CSS. In the last video, we created an HTML page. In this video, we're going to be adding some little styling to make it more beautiful. The point of this tutorial is so that every other website we're creating after now, we're just going to be making it look beautiful. Therefore, less talking, more coding. Let's get on. Yeah, so I'm going to be teaching you how to add CSS to the file we created in my last video. If you didn't watch the last video, the link is on the top of your screen right now. So we're going to be adding CSS, some styling to this, but first of all, we are going to discuss what CSS is, and I'm going to explain basically what CSS is, the types of CSS, and how CSS adds to the beauty of your website. So first of all, what's CSS? CSS stands for cascading style sheets. Now CSS is used to like add beauty, add colors, make your site look more beautiful, look more presentable. That's basically what CSS is all about. So when we talk about CSS, we talk about three main types of CSS. We have inline, we have external, and internal CSS. So inline CSS is when you're using the style attributes in HTML. So for example, this is what I mean. Let's say we want to style this h1 tag. So we call the style attributes and we say, let's say background, or let's say color, and I want the color to be red. So if we go to our web page, so you could see that my first HTML page is red. So that's basically what inline styling is all about. So it's basically adding the style attributes in the same line of the tag you want to give your styling to. So the next type of styling is internal styling. So basically internal styling is using the style tag to style inside the same HTML documents that you want to style. For example, I come under the body tag, preferably in the head. That's where your styling should be. So style, and I say h1, and I give it a color of red. So I'm going to delete this inline styling that I did previously. So now, what does this h1 mean? This h1 here is the tag selector. So when you're doing whether internal styling or external styling, there are three main things you should know. You're styling based on the class, you're styling based on the ID, and you're styling based on the tag name. So if you're styling based on the tag name, you just call the tag, open your two curly braces, give your CSS property and your CSS value. This is your CSS property, this is your CSS value. You call the tag, in this case h1. Now if you're styling by ID, you give the tag that you want to style, you give it an ID of wherever ID of your choice. So in this case I want to give it let's say page, because of it's my first HTML page. So I come here and I style ID. ID are styled using hash. So I pull hash, then I put the ID name that I gave it initially. So this now is styling based on ID. So the next type of styling is based on class. So if I come here and I change this ID to class, and I come here, I change this to dots. So we style classes making use of dots. So that's how classes are styled in web development. So there are three main things you should know here: styling by ID, styling by tag name, and styling by the class name. When you're styling by the class name, you make use of dots. When you're styling by the ID name, you make use of hash. And when you're styling by the tag name, you just call the tag open your curly braces and put in your CSS value, put in your CSS property, then your CSS value. Now, those are the main things you should keep in mind. And another thing here is when you're styling with ID, no two elements in your HTML and documents can have the same ID. That's the way it is supposed to be. Even if you use the same ID for multiple tags, nothing is really going to happen, but it's not going to make your HTML page valid. And when you're developing HTML pages, it's very important you put in mind the validity of your HTML page. So in this case now, I'm going to style this using my class name, and if I should go back to my browser, save this, go back to my browser and refresh, here we go. This is it. It's still red because I've used the class name which is page, and I've used dots to give it a styling. If I change this to ID, and I change this to hash, save this and go back to my browser and refresh, it's still going to be the same. So these main concepts are very important when it comes to CSS. It's very important you understand what an ID means. It's very important you understand what a class means, and it's very important to understand what a tag is. Now take note that if you're styling h1 tag, for example, on your web page, let's say this is an h1 tag, I come here and I take this ID off and I come to my internal styling and I put h1 here. And if I do have another h1 on that web page, so let's say I have another h1 here saying code with Lorenzo. Now the moment I save this and go back to my browser and refresh, those two elements would have the same styling, which in so many cases you won't want probably two elements to have the same style. So that's where using ID and using classes comes to play. If I want these two elements to have the same style, ideally I make use of class and I say probably code. I use the same class over here and I say code. Once I come here, I change the h1 style to dot code. Save this and refresh. Here we go, the same. But in this case now, we have used the same class to style two CSS, two HTML elements. So in the case where I want these two tags to have different styling, I make use of ID, like I said earlier. Now, remember that the IDs are supposed to be unique. Take note of that. It's very important to note that your IDs when coding are supposed to be unique. No two elements on your HTML page should have the same ID. So if I come here and say ID, and I say, let's say Lorenzo would be my ID in this case. So I come here, I say hash Lorenzo, open my curly braces, give it a color of yellow, and I change this to hash because of the ID that I've used here. Once I save this and I refresh, here we go. You could see my first HTML page is red, code with Lorenzo is yellow. So that basically is the concept of ID, classes, and tags. So back to what I was explaining, the types of CSS. So I've explained inline CSS. So I said you make use of the CSS, you make use of the CSS property, you make use of the HTML attribute style and giving your property and your value. Now for internal, you make use of the style tag in the same HTML document. Now the last one, which is the best way to perform your styling, is external CSS. So how this works is that you create a new file for your CSS. So that new file now in this case will be first.css. Save this And now I'm going to be taking off my styling here, taking it away, and then putting it in my new CSS file. Well, I'm going to take away the style tag because when you're doing external styling, you don't need the style tag. So here is my styling now, the same styling I did earlier, but now I'm going to be linking this HTML page to that CSS file. So that's why it's called external, because you're linking it to an external file. I don't know if you get what I'm saying, but that's what external CSS is all about. /css/first.css. I save this, go back to my browser, refresh. Here we go, still the same. So that basically is what CSS is all about. So 3 main types of CSS: inline, internal, external. Inline, used to use the HTML attributes style to give your property and your value in the opening tag of your HTML element. For inline style, for internal styling, you make use of the style tag. You make use of the style tag in the same HTML document. While for external, you make use of a new CSS file. Now, that new CSS file that you're creating, you put in your style in there, then you link it using the link tag in your HTML file. So in this case, I could have, for example, home.html, about.html. It's advisable for you to have home.css, about.css. Now, why this is ideal is because in situations where you want to probably adjust your CSS code as relating to your HTML, it's going to be easier, because if you just have like all the CSS bombarded in one file, CSS could be very, very long. So if you have your CSS bombarded in one file, you won't know which and which is for which page, which is for which page. So it's ideal that's one of the main reasons why external CSS is just the best. And I always advise that when coding web development, you always use external CSS. I won't advise inline, and I won't advise internal CSS. So that basically is that for the types of CSS. So like I said at the beginning, we are going to be adding some styles to this HTML page we just created to understand what styling is all about. So we're going to be using external CSS throughout this video from now on. So in this case, I want to, let's say, add color of red, add a background color. Now, truth be told, it's not possible for you to know what every CSS property in CSS is doing. There are so many properties in CSS. It's not possible for you to know everything, but the main basic ones, such as margin, padding, I'm going to be explaining in this video. So let's say background color is another important CSS property, and let's say I want the background color of aqua. That's a color I really like so much. Save this, give this probably background color of black #000. So now this brings me to different type of values we have when it comes to colors. So we have RGBA, which is red, green, blue, alpha. So the alpha there is for opacity. So if you want the shade of your color to like be dim, to add opacity to that particular color, that's what the aqua is there. So the higher the value for the aqua, it's from 0 to 1. So the higher it is, the more brighter it becomes. So if you take it to like, let's say 0.2, it gets really dim. Take it to 1, it gets really bright, the standard color. By default it's 1, the lowest is 0. So I'm going to be checking this out, and let's see what this looks like. So you can see the aqua color, then the black. So this is just little styling that we've added for now. Now let's go into the concept of padding and margin, which is a very, very important concept in CSS. And I'm going to be explaining this the very best way I can. As a beginner, you should be able to understand the way I'm going to be explaining this. So first things first, what's margin? Margin is basically adding space outside that particular element. So when we talk about margin, we mainly talk about containers. So you have a particular container. For example, you have a square now. For example, this mic in my front now. Margin is basically the space around it, outside of this mic, all the spaces around it. That's basically what margin is all about. Padding, on the other hand, is the space inside of the mic. So let's say, for example, now I'm going to take this out, and this is still HTML, and I want to explain the basics of CSS so that as time goes on, when I drop other videos, I'm just going to be making HTML and making it look beautiful, because you already have knowledge of the basics of CSS after this video. So div, and I say p tag, let's start with a heading tag. That's always best. So h1, this is the description of margin. P, let's just take this, put this h1 as margin. Then we're going to be creating another div, and we're going to be calling it h1 again, and in this case we're going to be saying padding. P tag, just going to be copying the, saying padding. This is the description of padding. So let's see what this looks like on the web page. So it's still the same web page. You can see we just have this. They are just plain text. Why are they plain text? Because we've created a container, but we've not specified a width, we've not specified a height, we've not specified any background color whatsoever. So we're going to be doing that quickly. So I'm going to be saying this will be a class of margin container, and this will be a class of margin padding container. So we're going to be styling this now. So we're going to take this out, and we're going to be saying dot margin container, and we're going to be giving this a width of 50px and a height of auto. We have to specify background color of, let's say, blue. So this is what this looks like. Now, why this is spanning out is because we've specified a particular width. So if I just take this two out, let's no need to specify width and height. Let's just leave it like this and just give it a background color. So it takes the space by which the element inside of it is contained. So this is basically what it looks like. No space at the top, no space at the bottom, but it's taking the full width of the web page. Now let's give this, I don't want it to be the full width, so we give this a width of, let's say, 300px. That's quite big though, but that should be fine. Yeah, that's fine. So next up is our padding container. We'll specify widths. In this case, I'm going to specify width of auto and background color of red. Width of auto is taking the full width, so just take this out. Let's say 400px, 300px as the same one we gave earlier. Let's see how this looks. So when you code in, yeah, it's CSS, so trust me, you're going to, like I said from the beginning of my early first video, I said web development is basically watching something come to life. So as you create, as you write those codes, going back to the browser, refreshing it, and making it look the way you picture it in your head. So there are a couple of times you're going to like make mistakes. There are a couple of times where you're going to try one of this and it doesn't work out. Don't be frustrated. It's bound to happen. Even the best of developers still have to face this hurdle. So as a developer that is just starting the journey of web development and you're having issues like this, sometimes it could be really frustrating where you're trying something and it doesn't seem to be working. Just keep pushing on. There's no challenge on it. Just keep pushing. So basically this is what we have on our container. So this is what a container genuinely looks like in HTML in web development. So I want to explain the concept of margin and padding before the ending of this video. So now margin, like I said, is the space around the container. So in this case now, this blue container is the container. So all the space around it, all those white spaces around it, is basically what margin is all about. So we have margin top, which is the space on top of the container around it. We have margin right, the space on top of the container around it. Margin bottom, the space at the bottom of the container around it. And margin left, the space at the left of the container around it. So that's basically what margin is about. Now padding, on the other hand, is the space inside of the container. So in the case of margin, it's outside, yeah, but in the case of padding now, it's inside. So the spaces that you have inside of this place, so here, on here, here, and here, that's basically what my padding is all about. So I'm going to be given a brief drawing around what this is saying. So first of all, let's just inspect this to explain the concept of margin and padding. So you can see margin here. This is the main container. Yeah, this is the main container, this border here. Now margin, on the other hand, is the space outside of this particular container. The border, the one with the thick line, which is this particular area, is actually the container where this is trying to describe. So now margin is the space around of it, the space outside of it. It's very important to take note of that. Why padding is the space inside of that border, inside of the container you just created. That's inside of this border. These are your borders in the case of this div. Now inside of this border is where you have your padding. Outside of the border is where you have your margin. So if I'm saying, in this case, I want to give a padding left of 20px, that's 20 pixels, padding top of 20 pixels, padding left of 20 pixels, and padding right of 20 pixels. Save this and let's see what this looks like. Now you could see the container actually remained the same size, but it's increased. It actually remained in the same position it was. The padding, the container didn't move, but the size increased. So it's basically adding inside of itself. It's not going outside. It's still in the same exact position it was at the beginning, but it's adding spaces inside of it. So basically, you could see that there's a space between this padding and this. This is the element because of what we did earlier. That was how it was earlier. But you can see the space it's created at the top here, which we specify padding top 20px, left padding right, padding left 20px. But the right didn't change because of the right increased. As you can see, we had these two containers in the same line, but you can see there's been an increase in the size. It's still in the same line here, but there's been an increase in the size because of the padding right 20px was specified. So that's basically what padding is all about. Now, how about margin? I'm still going to explain how we could reduce all those lines of code. So margin, on the other hand, 20px, So let's see how this now looks like for margin. Now you can see margin, the container moved. You could see there was movement in the container, but for padding, the padding remained in the same position, but added spaces inside of it. But for margin, you can see that the margin actually moved. It moved 20px left, moved 20px at the top, moved 20px at the right. Now that is, and also there was an increment in the space that was at the bottom. So that basically is what marginal padding is all about. Now, in the case of this many codes, and let's say the lesser the code, the more faster it is, and there are so many effectiveness and efficiency when it comes to shorter lines of code. So in this case, I'm going to be, instead of this whole 20px I've specified for top, for bottom, for left, for right, I could just specify one CSS property, which is margin, and use the same value that I used earlier, which is 20px, and save this, refresh. It should still look the same. So instead of those whole bulky lines of code, we could just specify to just 20px. Now the question now is, what if I want my margin left to be a different figure, my margin right to be a different figure, my margin bottom to be a different figure? Yeah, we could go about that. So you use the same margin property, but now the way it works is that it goes clockwise. So you specify margin 20px. First value is the top. The second value which is 10px, let's say 10px is the right. The third value is 2px, which will be the bottom, while the last value is for the left, which will be, let's say, 3px. So you could see 3px small at the side, 10px increased at the left, at the right, at the top, 20px. So that basically is how we could go about using multiple values and targeting the four sides. Now what if I just want to target my top and bottom, left and right? So you go about that by saying 20px for top and bottom, then 30px for left and right. So that's basically how you do that. So this value is for the top, this 30px for the 20px for the top and bottom, 30px for left and right. So let's refresh this. Here we go. This is what we have. So That's that. Same thing, same idea goes to padding. So if I want to just have one value, I just say padding 20px. Same thing is gonna happen. Okay, now it's a change because we specified the CSS property padding, and it's came into effect because it's padding. It came into effect to every value inside of the container because it's padding, because it's space inside. So every element inside of this container had that particular padding. So for margin, on the other hand, it's okay. We're done with that. For margin, on the other hand, we're done with that. So the next thing now would be to go back to CSS, then try for two values. So let's say 50px for left and right. You see there was an increment in the left and right, top and bottom remain the same. So that is that about basic concepts of CSS. Every other CSS property such as font size 20px, we've explained background color, we've explained color, width, we've explained width, we've explained height. Width is basically the length and breadth of the container. Height is basically the top and bottom, the space between the top and bottom of the container. Width is the breadth, height is the length of the container. So that basically is it. Every other CSS property just comes in with normal understanding. So font weight, bold, this would be to bolden. Then another CSS property that is very important is borders. So let's play around with borders for this padding container. First of all, let's look at what font size and font weight is doing here. So if I refresh this, headers are already bold by default, but you could see the p tag was automatically bold. Why? Because we didn't specify that we didn't want the p tag to be bold. We've called the whole container, we've given it a font weight of bold, which means that everything inside that container would be bold. So let's look at borders now. So if I specify border and I specify the width of the border, let's say 2px solid, and give it a color of blue. Save this, refresh. Now I don't know if you could see this, but I could see that there is a blue border inside of it. Let's increase this width to be, let's say 5px. Now you can see the border of this particular container because of we specified the border to be 5ps, which is the thickness of how we want the border to look. Then solid is the type of line we want, then the color of the border. So if I specify this to, let's say, dashes, dashed, I refresh this, now you can see we have a different border. Here the border now is all dashed like. So that basically is it for how to play around with borders. You could play around these values and see how it looks like. Like I said earlier, CSS is just playing around with those properties, playing around with those values for it to look exactly the way you want it to look. Another CSS property that is important is border radius. So border radius of, let's say, 10px. This would affect the sides of, it will affect the sides of the container. So we want to add edges. We want to make the edges to be curved. We make use of border radius, which, as we could see, the edges has that little curve in them. if I should increase this to, let's say, 20px, you can see the curve now is more obvious. In a situation where we'll probably want to make a circle, let's take this back to its normal width, 300px. Now we can't convert these divs to circles because there are already things inside of them. So what we could do is we could create a new class called circle. No need to put anything inside of it. Then come here, call the class circle, and we give it a border radius of 50%. First things first, because I know it's a circle I want to form. Then give it a height of, let's say, 100px. Give it a width of the same 100px, which is same height, same length, same breadth, which would definitely make it a square. Let's take this out. Let's see if it's actually a square. First things first, then background color of red. Save this. Here we go. These are square. So now let's make this now a circle. So we use border radius of 50%, and that should be good. Yeah, here we go. So that basically is those are the main CSS properties. Every other things are just basically English based and things that you could relate with. So that being said, we've come to the end of this video. Thank you very much for tuning in, and please kindly like, share this video to anyone who needs it, and kindly subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications bell so you get notified every time I post a new video. In order for you to follow up with your web development journey, it's good if you learning this every day. So I'm going to be replying to every comment. If you have any issues while writing the code, please just drop it in the comment section, and I'll make sure that I would help out in any way I can. So thanks for tuning in today, and see you in my next video.